Good morning, everyone. My name is Kate, and I work in JetBrains as a product marketing manager for Kotlin. I started my software development journey over a decade ago as an iOS developer, yes. Nice to meet you all, and thanks for joining me bright and early, really early, for my talk today. Now I want to learn more about you. Could you please raise your hand if you are familiar with Kotlin multi-platform? By familiar, okay. Like by familiar, I mean you have some hands-on experience. Maybe you've played with it in your pet projects, either you're adopting it now or using it in production. Again, yay, a little warm-up in the morning. Great to see so many hands. Next question. How many of you have encountered, some skepticism when you were discussing the potential of Kotlin multi-platform with your Android or iOS colleagues? Maybe you've heard, okay, like I love your activity. Maybe you've heard it's not stable enough for production, or like it's intriguing but not suitable for our existing project with tons of legacy. I don't know. Or maybe there is nothing to share in our project, or it's not worth it because the iOS developer experience is not good enough. Again, maybe some of this skepticism while discussing with colleagues who encountered this. OK, great. Well, it's quite expectable. Several reasons contribute to this. Firstly, Kotlin multi-platform is really highly flexible and configurable, which sometimes makes it a bit unclear how to begin to use it and how to utilize it best for your specific project. Secondly, as we all know, Kotlin multi-platform naturally aligns with Android development due to Kotlin and Gradle, and as a consequence of this, its integration with iOS world, let's say, much less straightforward. Lastly, Kotlin multi-platform has been around for more than 6 years. Let's check who among us are veterans and who witnessed that exciting KotlinConf keynote by Andrei Breslav in 2017, where experimental support for multi-platform project was announced. Who saw it? Oh, not many veterans are here. OK, great. While Kotlin multi-platform has evolved substantially over this period, myths have popped up around it, which sometimes might lead to skepticism. Today, I aim to delve into the current state of Kotlin multi-platform and clarify what's myth and what's reality. The goal is to spark your interest in Kotlin multi-platform, and what is more important, to equip you to confidently discuss it with your colleagues, especially those on the iOS side. So are you ready? Let's get started. Together with Cody, we're going to skate through 10 myths related to flexibility of Kotlin multi-platform, its maturity, and its role in iOS developers' life. Yes, I know that this is DroidCon, but trust me, understanding the perspective of the both teams is crucial for multi-platform success. Myth number 1. You can only share just a portion of your application logic, such as API layer or data models. Could I see a show of hands of those who agree or partly agree with the statement? OK, yeah, I see your hands. Don't hesitate, like there is no correct answer. Or it is, OK. The next myth is somewhat the opposite of this one, so we will address both of them together. Myth number 2, to unleash the full power of Kotlin multi-platform, you need to maximize the amount of shared code. Again, who agree with the statement? Raise your hands. More hands, OK. Let's discuss this myth together. First, let's examine this chart. It's data from recent Kotlin multi-platform survey. Respondents were asked, what part of your code were you able to share between platforms? As you can see, networking, data models, data serialization indeed lead the pack. That's not surprisingly at all. These parts typically show no differences across platforms, and the required libraries are already available with official Kotlin support. Coroutines, Kotlin serialization, and Cater, of course. But as the chart demonstrates, these aren't the only parts of code you can share. Of course, algorithm computations is the obvious candidate. Larger projects often require some internal utilities, analytics, logging, etc. You can share those too, and more than 50% of teams do it. Data storage and validation, which also usually platform independent, are also shareable, thanks to mature libraries from Kotlin community like SQLite or Real. And there is nothing preventing you from going further, stepping into the platform-specific area of iOS and Android and starting share presenters, controllers, view models, and even navigation. Yes, this approach does require some additional effort to reach the agreement between iOS and Android teams regarding the API and the architecture. But the result may be worth it because the percentage of shared code will increase. Building on this idea, let's now take a look at 3 architecture examples. The first one is a notable open source sample called DKMP, and it implements the MVI pattern and uses the unidirectional data flow approach. Second one is the architecture used in one of the many Kotlin multi-platform production apps, and it shares view models. Last one is the official Kotlin sample by Konstantin Skarebov and myself, and we use the simplified Redux architecture in this sample. You will find hundreds of similar architectures if you do some quick search in Google images like Kotlin multi-platform architectures. This reflects how developers tend to organize new projects nowadays, aiming to share as much code as possible while keeping the UI layer thin and native, regardless of whatever you prefer, MVI, MVVM, Redux, or any other architecture patterns. However, is this the only correct way to use Kotlin multi-platform? I would disagree. The best approach is to understand your team's current needs and project requirements, and base your decision on these factors. I will explain. Let's take a look at 3 main approaches to Kotlin multi-platform architecture. We've already discussed the first one. The second approach could be a viable option if your team, tends to be more like conservative. For example, you have some established methodologies on both platforms on how to implement the presentation layer. Alternatively, if you are dealing with your existing huge code base, and, for example, it requires some significant changes. Maybe you now need to support the offline mode, or maybe you need to migrate to a completely new API and data models. Then, while making these changes, you can also transition your existing project to cross-platform. And then the interesting scenario. If you have some existing project, there might be some parts of your logic that are frequently updated and run the risk of becoming out of sync. This could be any type of calculations or computations, like basically anything you would cover with unit tests. These crucial parts of your logic need to work consistently across platforms. And you can make multi-platform only this specific small part of your logic. Sometimes there are indeed the cases when sharing a minimum amount of code will actually maximize the benefits you get from Kotlin multi-platform. So let's continue this discussion. Many of myths about Kotlin multi-platform are consequences of regular stereotypes about cross-platform technologies in general. For example, it's better to wait for a new project to give a Kotlin multi-platform a try. This myth doesn't apply to Kotlin multi-platform because of how it works. It compiled to JVM bytecode for Android and to native binaries for iOS via Kotlin native. So you can add your shared code just in any other regular iOS and Android dependency with no extra work. You can reuse your code you already have on Android with no risks. And that's why it's a great choice for gradual adoption. No need for heavy dependencies or building a completely new infrastructure. That's why adding it may be worthwhile when you are planning to share only a small, yet important part of your logic. To learn more about this approach, I would recommend you watch an insightful episode of Talking Kotlin podcast with Goncalo Silva, the CTO of DoISTAB. They integrated Kotlin multi-platform into an existing project that had been in production for a long time. So, what's the story? They started with a small, yet important piece of logic that frequently updated and often caused problems due to becoming out of sync. The code was pretty simple, but bugs still occurred there. It was the sorting logic. The display order of your to-dos in your to-do application is a very important thing. After that, they extended their use of Kotlin multi-platform to include filter logic, parsing the filter query string and returning the expected tasks. After that, they tackled date parsing and string normalization. So we created multiple Kotlin multi-platform libraries, with each one focused on a specific task. We use some of these libraries internally, while others have been open-sourced. Gankala called such small libraries Kotlin multi-platform micro-libraries, like microservices, but micro-libraries. This concept of micro-libraries is a brilliant way to introduce Kotlin multi-platform to your existing project, with minimum effort, low risks, and address all these long-standing issues with inconsistent behavior between iOS and Android. OK, where are we now? Kotlin multi-platform is a really flexible tool and perfect for gradual adoption, so you can easily integrate it to your project and stay, on this comfortable level of code sharing. You don't need to go all in, all at once. If you are starting a new project, you can go in and maximize the amount of shared code while still having a beautiful native UI. Now, let's talk a bit about the development process. Myth number 4. In the majority of Kotlin multi-platform teams, only Android engineers contribute to the common code. I'm curious to hear about you. Who agrees with this, or you have this experience? Show me by raising your hands up. Only Android engineers contribute to the common code. OK, not many of you. Yes, that's not true. According to the latest Kotlin multi-platform survey, in nearly 60% of Kotlin multi-platform teams, iOS engineers contribute to the shared code, and half of them contribute equally. In my opinion, this is the ideal scenario when Android and iOS engineers contribute equally. This not only reduces the buzz factor, but it also allows for cross-sharing the expertise. And what is more important, it ultimately motivates your iOS colleagues to invest more in Kotlin multi-platform part of your project. After all, 2 heads are better than 1, right? So this myth is busted. And I suggest we continue debunking more myths about iOS developers with Kotlin multi-platform, because, as I said at the beginning of my presentation, I believe that the teamwork is the key to success. The interesting part begins. You can't make your Kotlin API look nice in Swift. Could you raise your hands who agree with this? Hi. Hi. OK. First, let's remember how Kotlin Swift interoperability works. Currently, yes, there is no direct Kotlin Swift interoperability, and it works through Objective-C. As a result, your shared code API doesn't look, let's say, too attractive to Swiftie, and iOS developers can't exploit the full power of this modern language. Some examples. Default values for function parameters are not supported. Generic functions interfaces are not properly supported. And the most demonstrative example, yes, sealed classes and interfaces. Imagine you decide to share as much code as possible and share the presentation layer. You have this nice sealed interface to describe your state, which can be loading, empty, data, or error. What would you expect to see in Swift? Well, as an iOS developer, I would expect to see a nice enum with some associated values, of course. But the reality is different, yes. Of course, you can still use it, but you won't receive any help from Xcode or Swift compiler. Another instance is how Kotlin suspend function appear in Swift as functions with a completion handler. It enables you to easily use them from Swift code, but it doesn't offer cancellation support. Also, as Objective-C doesn't support generic on protocols, the flow interfaces, they lose their generic value type and make them almost impossible to use from Swift code. Also, it's absolutely not straightforward how to integrate all of this with Combine or Rx Swift or Async, for example. This just doesn't work out of the box, what is important. So, does this mean that we confirm the myth? Absolutely not. The reality is that you can make your Kotlin API look attractive in Swift. But achieving this does require some effort, yes. The strength of the community can significantly enhance your Swift API or your Kotlin API of your shared module. There is Gradle plugin, for instance, called K-Swift, which generates a Swift-friendly API for your Kotlin native framework. It has a wealth of features, and one of which is support for sealed classes and interfaces. With this, you can achieve the exact same behavior we just discussed. And when it comes to working with coroutines, there is an exceptional library named Campaignative Coroutines. It supports Async, Combine, and Eric Swift iOS frameworks, and it generates all the necessary wrappers, saving you from manual work. Now you can use coroutines, now you can use flows, suspend functions, anything. Last but not least, using the latest Kotlin version can really make the difference. The Kotlin team is constantly improving the interoperability with Objective-C, which in turn improves its interoperability with Swift. For instance, in Kotlin 1.8, it brings 3 new annotations designed to enhance your API. One of these is simple Objective-C name. This annotation directs Kotlin compiler to use a custom name for class, property, parameter, or function in Objective-C and Swift. Yes, I know that it's just about the naming, but we all know that in software development world, that naming, it truly matters. And having idiomatic Swift names in your API can dramatically improve its readability. I would love to go deeper into this topic, but our time, unfortunately, is limited. And if you're curious about ways to enhance your Swift API, I highly recommend you watching this great session, Kotlin Multi-Platform for iOS Developers, State and Future, from KotlinConf by Salman Bryce. It's packed with a lot of practical advice and strategies that can significantly enhance your Kotlin Swift API and make your colleagues happy. Let's summarize. Yes, you can make your Kotlin API look good on Swift, but it does demand some additional work. But the myth is busted in this wording. Next up, the iOS developer experience leaves much to be desired. Again, who agree with this? What about? You think it's great? Oh, you should talk with iOS colleagues. OK. Let's look at Kotlin multi-platform development environment. For Android developers, for all of us, adopting Kotlin multi-platform is just about adding basically another Gradle module and connecting a new Gradle plugin, a Kotlin multi-platform Gradle plugin. You're still working with all the familiar tools, Kotlin, Gradle, Android Studio, or IDEA, and at the end, you can use JVM debugger. It's really important. For iOS developers, it's a different story. In the past, everything was in one place. Xcode. OK, and CocoaPods sometimes. Now, if we talk about actively contributing to the common code, not just using it, the project configuration becomes much more complex, yes. You need to learn new tools, a new language, a new IDE, and finally Gradle, oh my God, and understand how all these concepts are connected with your iOS project. So comparing to the Android developer and native developer experience, the iOS development experience indeed leaves much to be desired. And now, let's wrap it up with the final myth about iOS developers and Kotlin multi-platform. It's hard to convince iOS developers to adopt Kotlin multi-platform. Yes, OK. Where are we now? When using the shared module API, they can't use the full power of Swift. The complexity of project configuration increases, and they need to learn the entire new tooling. And that's it. The myth confirmed. Thanks for attention. No, it's indeed hard, but how we can blame them? However, I don't want to leave you here with just this fact, of course. I would like to share some ideas on how to improve the situation. First of all, don't hesitate to offer help to your colleagues during the onboarding process. You are already absolutely familiar with the ecosystem. You keep up with the news. You understand what's going on. There are already many excellent resources for onboarding, particularly focused on the iOS development aspect, such as iOS Kit from TouchLab, for example. Secondly, use helpful tools designed to simplify the onboarding process and project configuration. Being a Kotlin multi-platform advocate in your project and your company doesn't mean just promoting the technology and its benefits, but also ensuring that you are using all the available resources in the ecosystem to make your life and life of your colleagues easier. For instance, consider tools like KDoctor or KMembridge. KDoctor is a command line tool that helps you set up the environment for Kotlin multi-platform app development. It ensures that all the required components are properly installed and ready for use. If something is missing or not configured, KDoctor identifies the problem and, what is more important, suggests how to fix it. Knowing something is wrong with your environment before you try to compile your project can save a lot of time. Managing your project configuration can be quite a hassle, yes, especially if your iOS and Android projects aren't located in the same repository. This is not because of overly complex, but rather because it doesn't work again smoothly out of the box, requiring you to invest time to understand and to setting it up. So there is where KMM Bridge can be really a game changer. It's a set of Gradle tools that simplifies the process of publishing and consuming pre-built Kotlin multi-platform Xcode framework binaries. This can really save you a significant amount of time. And finally, the point that I can't stress enough: work together. Be patient when addressing some beginner questions about Kotlin, about multi-platform, about Gradle. Suggest pair programming, for example. It's fantastic practice, and it also works great for onboarding. Keep in mind, again, that the success of multi-platform project lies in combining efforts of both Android and iOS teams. Let's not forget, teamwork, yay, is a key to success in any project. All right, just 3 myths left. Let's take a breather from our discussion about iOS developers and shift the gears a bit. Next up, the intriguing myth. There is absolutely no point in using 2 cross-platform technologies in a single project. Please raise your hands who agree. Yeah, it might sound logical initially. After all, if you are already using a cross-platform solution, why would you add another one? However, this is not necessarily the case. Let me tell you the Shopify story. I would like to showcase this example because it's like a great illustration of 2 main points. First, multi-platform is an excellent choice for existing projects. And second, it's really flexible and can accommodate a variety of projects. So what's the story? Shopify has been using React Native in their projects for a long time. They have a great expertise in it. You can check it in their technical blog. They are absolutely satisfied with the cross-platform UI. For them, it works. But they encountered performance issues when dealing with background processes. To support the app in offline mode, they need to regularly synchronize the local database with the server. So they found that as the number of background jobs increased, they experienced poor responsiveness due to the combination of single-threaded JavaScript and single-threaded UI threads. Most of heavy lifting jobs, like networking and data access, were handled with native libraries. And they assumed that these libraries were well behaved because it's native, not blocking the JS or UI threads. However, they found that whenever the jobs were running, the app became almost unresponsiveness. The reality of working in React Native, especially in the case of heavy networking or data and native modules interactions, that going over this bridge of native and cross-platform layers for React Native is an expensive operation. So what they did? They wrote a new background job manager using Kotlin multi-platform. They handle OS-specific code to handle OS-specific code. They used SQLite, we all know it. They used Apollo. And also they wrote their own wrappers about file I/O and shared preferences and NS user defaults, and etc. As a result, they managed to share approximately, together with shared React Native code, 39% of the code. And what is more important, they experienced a 10x performance improvement. Previously, this initial sync operation for a medium-sized store took at least 30 seconds, can you imagine? But with the new sync manager in Kotlin multi-platform, it completed the same task in just 2-3 seconds. So it might make sense to use more than one cross-platform technology in your project, provided the fact that you know what you are doing. Remember this is not the legal advice at all. Myth number 9. Kotlin multi-platform is not ready for production. Yes, I had a great chat with many of you yesterday on our JetBrains booth, and I'm aware that many of developers here have been using it for quite some time. But I still often encounter this question. So let's discuss it a bit. Kotlin multi-platform for mobile use cases went alpha in August 2020. Interesting fact that even before that, when it was experimental, major companies, including VMware, Autodesk, and Quizlet, were already using it in production. Good for them. Keep in mind, why? Why? Are they so risky or what? The fact is, the stability statuses aren't about some runtime stability. They refer to API stability and the level of the risk of migration issues. Thus, by moving the technology to alpha, JetBrains has shown its fully commitment to improve this technology and helping it evolve. After alpha release, we saw more great user stories from companies like Netflix, Philips, Leroy Merlin, and Baidu. To achieve beta status, we at Kotlin team had to address all the top problems affecting user experience that will require breaking changes. And the perfect example of it, many of you know it, I believe, is the new Kotlin native memory manager. This update solved this long-standing inconsistency between how native and JVM memory managers worked. And with this introduction of a new memory manager and the needed migration, when it became default, along with several other important changes, Kotlin multi-platform went to beta. And now this means that the technology is almost done. It's safe to use it in your projects. Kotlin team is very actively working to minimize any migration issues that you might encounter. And as more companies are adopting Kotlin multi-platform, we are busily applying the finishing touches to provide the robust multi-platform foundation for all kinds of projects. You can follow this stabilization process by checking out the What's New multi-platform and Kotlin native sections in our What's New documentation page for each new Kotlin release. We expect to complete all these finishing touches by the end of this year. Kotlin multi-platform will then reach stable. And from that point onwards, the technology will evolve while strictly following the backward compatibility rules. You might be wondering, what to expect after we reach stable status. Well, we've been discussing challenges of integrating Kotlin multi-platform with iOS development extensively. So one of the main directions, of course, for future improvements is, of course, enhancing the iOS developer experience. This, of course, includes working on direct export of Kotlin code to Swift, on Kotlin Swift interoperability. And the second area of focus, it's time to discuss the last myth. Myth number 10, with Kotlin multi-platform, you can share the application logic, not the UI. Of course, now it's not true. We've all been here for a long time, at least yesterday. Many of you were at KotlinConf. So yes, it's not true anymore. You can still choose to share only application logic, only a small part of application logic, and benefit from implementing a native UI if this is your requirement. But there are definitely situations where shared UI is a must. And today, you can achieve it with Compose multi-platform. It's a declarative framework for sharing UIs across multiple platforms, based on Kotlin and Jetpack Compose, of course. It supports Android, again, of course, as well as desktop. It offers experimental web support, and now Kotlin multi-platform for iOS is in alpha. So you can build your user interface once, and if you use Kotlin multi-platform for application logic when you use, your applications will be 100% in Kotlin. By the way, please don't hesitate to request a demo on our JetBrains booth. And of course, right after me, stay here if you are curious in Compose multi-platform. My colleague Sebastian Eigner will give an excellent talk about it. So that was the last myth. and it's time to sum things up. We discussed many intriguing aspects of Kotlin multi-platform development, but the main two ideas stand out. Firstly, understanding the perspective of both the Android and iOS teams is the key to success. Again, I will repeat it again and again. Once you understand why your iOS developers might be not so excited as you about Kotlin multi-platform, you can find the ways to make it more appealing to them. I'm talking not just about using some great tools from JetBrains or from Kotlin community. I'm talking about offering support and collaborative work. Next one, Kotlin multi-platform is not just a tool, it's a multi-tool. It's incredibly flexible, highly configurable, and can be adopted to fit your specific needs in terms of your project size, of the maturity of your code base, of the technology you're already using, of the expertise you have in your teams, and your product requirements, of course. By the way, you can get this nice multi-tool by participating in the great activity in our JetBrains Kotlin booth. So, to wrap it up, take time to understand the specific of your team and your product. Learn on the experience of other companies that are already benefiting from using Kotlin multi-platform. Work together. And if you do, you will definitely find a success. That's all. You can access all the materials I mentioned in my talk by scanning this QR code. And thanks a lot for your attention.